Welcome to MJ Hobby Corner, guys, and this is Deep Sea Project Phase 2. Now, Phase 1 was all the sculptures, and of course we're doing all this for a game of Deep Wars, which should come in the future. And I want to start building an underwater table, and I want to have some options so that we could do different underwater environments. Now, I'm going to start with coral reefs, which are shallow, and then move down the reef into deeper and deeper underwater environments, and maybe end it with smoker vents. Right, that's the deepest you can go in many ocean areas. So we're going to talk about those smoker vents and things like that in the future. But for now, I want to start with coral reefs, and what I will do is as I make the terrain, we're going to fill up a table that I'm going to just set up. A very small table. Remember, Deep Wars is a game that uses very small tables and small model counts. And then I'm just going to start building the reef. So as I build the terrain, you guys will see the reef building slowly. So, okay, so this is my sponge terrain. Now, one of the most important things and remember, guys, this is all just my opinion. Everybody has different ideas, different methods of doing their terrain and everything else. This is what works for me. I use tinfoil to make a little shoal of fish. Now, this is important to me because I'm trying to give the illusion that this thing is underwater. Well, if my opponent player or whoever sees it and you see fish gliding over the rock, well, you immediately think, oh, okay, that's underwater, right? So it gives the terrain kind of a better feel. And again, that's my opinion. So we're going to be working with the first video that I'm doing for this project. We're going to talk about this kind of making little shoals of fish and other little things that you can glue to the terrain to make it look a little bit more underwater. Now, these are giant polychaetes. Okay, these are these giant tube worms. And then they call them feather dusters because they have these feathery tentacles that pop out of the tube, and then that's how the worm feeds. And I made mine very giant because, of course, a Deep Wars diver is about this big. And to be honest with you, that's not an exaggeration in some parts of the deepest ocean. Okay? All right, so we're going to talk about fish shoals and adding that kind of thing to give the terrain an interesting feel. So I'm going to show you how I make these, and remember, there are many different ways to make this. Another way that you can make this, if people don't really like working with tinfoil or whatever, is simply print out small fish in a scale that you like. You can print them out in color, whatever. On hard card, you print them out on card like you would for paper models, and then you cut them out. And the trick is you want to have these clear plastic attachments, and I save this kind of stuff. This stuff is precious to me. I make all kinds of stuff with this. And so I cut out the lid portion here, and I make my little attachment points for the fish. This way, unless you're looking at it really closely, you know, it kind of feels that the fish are hovering over the sponge. So I'm going to do that with this one, and this is one I just started, okay? But I want to show you how I make the fish. Now, before I even do that, here is a snail that I sculpted, and of course, this is a giant whelk, right? This is a giant snail. I used a real seashell and just sculpted the snail out of Super Sculpey, added the little eye stalks and the little sensory stalks, and then what I'm going to do is paint this in like a bright blue, give it some tiger stripes, who knows, whatever. I'm not going to paint the shell. And the reason why I do this is that this saves me clay. I mean, I used a tiny little clump of clay to make the snail, and this really saves me clay by not sculpting the seashell, and it saves me time. So what I do then is I take, once it's all painted, and I glue it on my sponge And there you have it, a giant snail and all these fish like moving through. Okay, so that to me gives the terrain piece a lot of interest, and I'm going to be making more of these. And wait till you see what I have planned for these shells. First things first, I just want to say that I sculpture with tinfoil. I used to make these dinosaur skeletons, very elaborate. Some of these skeletons had like 100 pieces to them. And so I'm used to working with tinfoil a lot. But anyway, so to make one of my fish, now remember, I'm not going for ultra detail. I'm not going, I just want a basic fish body plan. And I have tons of tinfoil. It's very easy for me to get. It's very easy for me to shape, and etc., etc. So I have my basic torpedo shape with the fin and the tail fin. And then I take my pliers and I want to squeeze the area of the tail fin, that little area between the tail fin and the body, and I just want to like twirl it around here with the tweezers. Okay, reshape my tail because that kind of upsets the shape a little. So you see that you have this like skinny area, the tail, and then the torpedo shaped body. Now reef fish tend to be very colorful, but they're not all colorful. Sometimes you get silvery fish that come to feed, you know, in the reef. And the fish that I'm depicting are actually quite large, because if you look at a deep waters diver and scale it with this fish is pretty big. So I keep flattening, okay? And then if I don't like the shape of the tail, I could just like trim it a little bit, right, with scissors, and then reshape a little bit. The idea is I want to flatten this piece a little bit, okay? So I'm going to do the body, and I am going to flatten the body a little bit and really encourage that torpedo shape. Okay. And I like the shiny aspect that this does, right? That this illusion. And then what I do is I could bend it a little bit just to say that, you know, the tail is moving one way or the other, whatever, right? Sorry, guys. I got to remember to keep things in the camera. I had it on too much of a focus. All right, so I'm cutting my strip. And this is going to be my flight stand, basically, for the fish. So, the trick to fish shoals. First of all, they usually travel in one direction, unless, of course, you know, they're not going to be moving here. So we're going to be almost like taking a picture, right? Freezing it. But these fish shoals usually go in one direction, and then they make sharp changes in direction. But it's usually, there's usually a group of fish that are kind of the lead, and they like move this way and that, but it's always in one direction, right? And they make very fast, jerky movements. I snorkeled in coral reefs, and I tell you, it's an amazing world, the world of undersea. So I cut my little plastic, and I make like a little triangular shape, and the trick is I also cut a little bit of a, if you see if this will focus, because this plastic's hard to see. There you go. So I cut a point on the bottom, and I make sure that my tip is very thin, because this is a small body. Then I twist my little tip like this, and that's going to be the anchor point for the fish. Next, I take a dot of hot glue, and remember that hot glue will melt this plastic, so you got to be careful. And then just attach my fish to the little plastic. Okay, and he doesn't have to be straight. He could be up, facing down, however you want. If you want to make the fish kind of feeding off the reef, then their little heads could be pointing, you know, into the rock. That would be interesting. And then I choose a spot to anchor him. And sometimes I will bend this anchor point and just pick a spot And that seems to be good. And it's very random. Again, I'm not going for super realism or whatever. I just want the effect of fish. Be surprised how these little details like that could really make the terrain very interesting. Now, the other trick is to make, and here I bend my plastic so that, there you go. Okay, and the trick is to make different sizes of plastic because you want the fish in all these different like levels, and you want it kind of random. So that's it. To paint the little snail. Now for the snail, I have a ton of seashells here, and I bought these at the dollar store. These things can be expensive sometimes, so you got to really shop around. And I get the cheapest thing I can. And with some of these seashells, I'm actually going to use them. If I sculpture a squid-like form coming out of here, I would actually have an ammonite, you know. And again, the shell just helps save material. That's all it is, you know, and time. So I'll think about that. But anyway, so we have snails. And my tube worms, tube worms are important, I think, because they add a lot of character to these underwater environments. And so I'm using the, from a brown paper bag, I cut out the handles, and that's what I use for my tube worms. They're perfect, because if you've seen tube worms, you'll see that they have this almost papery kind of casing, right? So I don't even need to paint it if I don't, you know, if I don't want to. And then for my corals, and this is a very fuzzy coral. I'm waiting for this to dry because this is going to go here into this terrain piece. And my coral, I use homemade flock. I make my own flocking powder. And I make my flocking powder in different colors. I'm going to show an example. Okay, and I have a video in my channel on how I make flocking powder. This was like a rusty orange color, and I have red, and I have yellow, and I have blue, and pink, I believe. So blue is not a very common color under sea, but there are some corals that have almost like a radiant blue. But the more common colors are oranges and yellows and greens. So all I did was, from the dollar store, Julie and I had bought all of these snowflakes, okay? And so I took some of them, and with Julie's permission, of course, and then cut them up. And some of them I leave like this, because this forms a nice coral head. And then what I do is I stick them in random patterns, right, on my rock or whatever it is, and I flock them. All right, I cover them in flocking powder. And glue, of course. These edges that are white, I take a brush, kind of match the color, and then just like tap it over, right? And then once everything is dry, I can stick it to my terrain piece. And there I have another kind of like coral piece. Right. A little bit of work on this, and then I'll show you a couple of other things. Okay, so let's do a little scatter terrain piece. I'm hoping to have some scatter terrain pieces, you know, coral pieces, and then some larger, more intricate ruins with corals and crusting and all that kind of stuff. But that'll be later in the phase. Right now, we're starting off small. So I have my tinfoil, and yes, I work a lot with tinfoil, and in fact, a lot of the battle reports that you see, you will see my tinfoil ruins. I've made whole cave systems with tinfoil, etc. There is a trick to working with it because, like anything, it has a lot of disadvantages as well as advantages. The one thing is that it's very easy to work with, to mold, to bend, to cut, etc. What I do is I take chunks of foam, like this, right? Cut it up randomly, and then a little bit of hot glue, fold my tin foil, make sure that there are no real, like, put the seams on the bottom, where I'm gonna be gluing the piece. Okay, we'll talk about painting and all that later. I already have a playlist on tinfoil work, but so I'm gonna start my reef. But say if you don't like working with this material, say you use foam or whatever you use to make your rocks, cork. You know, there's a wide variety of materials. But I'm going to use my tinfoil. I'm going to take my largest rock and just place it down like this. Okay? And when I cut my cardboard base, I usually like to go irregular. Right? I don't like too many straight edges. It just doesn't look realistic. I don't know. Sometimes what I'll do is I'll cut bases so that they kind of fit into each other. So you have this situation going like a jigsaw puzzle. And it just makes the terrain look cool. You know, again, folks, that's my opinion only. You know, everyone works in different ways. All right, now this one has the seam here. I also usually hot glue the seams together so I don't have them. And I'm just we're gonna build this up a little bit, all right? So you guys get the idea, and then I'll show you what's next. Okay, so I have all my tinfoil rock work glued in the random shape, you know, in a kind of almost like a pyramid shape. You know, I'm stacking big pieces on the bottom, little pieces on top. And then I go ahead with my hot glue gun and I start texturing the base. It's a quick and dirty way of doing it. And then the sides of the corrugation, I like to hit that with hot glue as well because it really protects the edges and also eliminates that, you know, corrugation. So I let this dry a little bit, and then the first thing I do is I want to treat my tinfoil to get it ready for painting, and I paint all my tinfoil first, and then all of the fouling organisms I do separate. Okay, it's just an easier way, so I don't have to like work on every detail with the brush if I glue everything all at once, you know. All right, so while this is drying, before I get to the rock work, I'm going to make some staghorn. So for my staghorn coral formation, I just cut out a piece of cardboard in the shapes that I want, kind of like this, very random, very, you know, blobby, and then put a little bit of hot glue, and I cut the tin foil where I want it to fold and just basically give the thing a tinfoil skin. And that's all I'm doing. All right, so I'm going to go finish this up and we'll see what happens next. Okay, so now that I have my coral in place, I'm going to put the large, these big coral heads in place, right? And then now I'm going to start treating the rockwork and the coral so that I can give it a spray paint. Now, in order to seal my coral heads, and I give them really random, bizarre shapes, right? In order to seal them up, I take my hot glue gun and very carefully, without burning myself, oh, I've burned myself so many times, and just kind of give it a little bit of texturing with the hot glue gun. It also seals any, like, seams, right? So I'm going to do that and then attach it to the rock. Okay, and the trick to coral, I think, from what I've seen in the wild, is to have, you know, random pieces that are sticking out everywhere, kind of, they angle downward into the rock, kind of like that. And just mind you that, of course, Google is a wonderful thing these days, and I do use a lot of Google images. I just go online and hunt down coral images, and there you have a ton of sources of inspiration. So you don't have to snorkel, point being, but those images are engraved in my head, and so those snorkeling images, and so, you know, I'm kind of going by some of those things. So let's prepare this for spray. I spray paint, since I'm not using any kind of homemade texture paste or anything on my rocks, I'm just leaving the tin foil. I use a little bit of texture paste, Vallejo texture paste, and that's this stuff, the earth texture. And I coat some areas of the rock, paying attention to the nooks and crannies and some of the seams of the tinfoil. When this stuff dries, it's very hard, and so it'll help seal up the tinfoil and create areas of anchor points for the paint. When you're working with tinfoil, that's what you want to think about, is anchor points for the paint. And of course, the roughness and texture of the tinfoil helps in that effect. Now, keep in mind that I'm doing this, but that's because I don't mind the sheen that is left behind by the tinfoil. This kind of stuff helps, creates a little bit more opacity. So, but even with a couple of coats of paint, you may get a little bit of that sheen from the tinfoil you can't really get rid of. For me, it really doesn't matter to me, but some people don't like that, you know. So again, this is just what works for me. Then I take some texture paint and texture paste and do some of the hot glue areas here, the whatever, these little burrows or whatever from organisms. So okay, almost ready to paint. So the most important thing, the first step is I spray the terrain piece with Loctite spray adhesive, or it can be any kind of spray. Sometimes if I don't have spray, I will take watered down glue and just coat everything with watered down glue. Okay, so I squirted my terrain piece with a lot of glue, right? A lot of nice glue. I gave it a couple of seconds so that the glue dries up, not dries up, but starts curing a little bit. It's sticky. And then give it a nice coat of black, flat black. And then I gave the coral head a nice coat of bright red. Now, the rest is pretty much taking dry brush and differentiating the rock from the coral. And then I can start sticking all kinds of critters and things on the rocks, including algae, maybe some kelp, maybe more corals, right? And some of this encrusting sponge thing that I'm going to be making, and just basically give it the feel that this is a living reef. Now remember, some people will say, well, that coral is way too big. I mean, if you put a diver there, the deep wars diver, 28 millimeter, that coral's humongous. Yes, and that's what I want. Deep Wars is a game where there's a lot of biomancy, there's a lot of magic, there's all this weird stuff going on beneath the sea, and so these structures have mutated, they're huge, they're, you know, that's my story, I'm sticking with it. Anyway, this is still sticky, I need to let it dry fully, and while this is drying, I can start making my little fish shoals and my little critters. And one of the things I'm going to do is I found a couple of seashells that actually match, and I'm going to be gluing this together, and I'm going to have a giant clam, or a giant scallop in this case, you know, a living one, right? And this will be embedded into the terrain, and I'll figure out a way how to do it. There's plenty of nooks and crannies in those rocks. Now, I may give this one a little bit of a paint job, so it'll match better, and then we'll have this giant clam there who may gobble up some unsuspecting diver. Okay, and for my fish, I'm starting to get a little more creative, and this one's a little bit big, so I'm going to maybe do an eye or something, just so that it has a little bit of detail. But, and again, I may paint this one, because this is like an angelfish, giant angelfish, and then a couple of smaller silver ones. And I'm going to make more, and we can kind of randomly stick them around the reef once this is all dry, okay? And then, so that's pretty much it. We have to wait for this to dry, and I'll probably just make another video where we finish this piece up, all right? And that'll give me the chance to make all of these little decorations and things that are going to go onto the terrain. You guys get an idea where I'm going with this. Now, naturally, you want to see this all painted up, all finished on a proper setup, a proper, you know, tabletop, before you can fully kind of appreciate the terrain. Also, this terrain, it takes a little more time because we are going to be, you know, decorating it with so many different things. But in the long run, I think it's going to make an interesting table, you know, and that's just my thought. So there you go. There is phase 2 of the deep sea project, and we're moving along. Hello guys, so that was, I don't want to make this video too long. I will be finishing that scatter terrain, and so this first deep sea project phase 2 video that's a mouthful, uh, is basically covering scatter terrain, and we're talking about coral reefs. Now there's a ton of other things that we can do to represent coral reefs, right? But the idea is you want a complex kind of environment with all these nooks and crannies, but you still have to think about the miniatures and the game rules and the miniatures. Now Deep Waters has something very interesting. It does take into account depth. So your divers could actually get nitrox poisoning if they go up or down too fast. You know, that's interesting. So I don't know too much about Deep Waters yet, haven't studied the rules yet, but I do know that. And so when we make the terrain, we do want to keep in mind that figures have to be able to either stand on certain pieces of terrain or, you know, whatever. You have to be able to interact with the terrain so that it's not just an aesthetic look. You do want it to play a part in your game. That's the interesting thing about wargaming, right? It's that three-dimensional aspect of the table. Now, for deep sea stuff, we're not going to cover that yet. The next couple of videos, we're going to finish the scatter terrain. We're going to talk a little bit more about corals and other organisms that we can add to the table. And this is all on a budget. Remember, some people could say, well, just go out and buy a bunch of aquarium terrain. Aquarium stuff can be very expensive. They have beautiful stuff out there, but it can be pretty expensive. And especially like in my area, it's just way too much money. So I'd rather build my own stuff. So for deep sea stuff, I happen to have a cave system out of tinfoil that I built some time ago. It was last year. And I have a ton of these, and I can form like caves and stuff. Well, this is perfect for underwater, like deep sea seamounts and things like that. So I don't have to make a lot of terrain anymore because I have that. Now, the only thing we want to add to this are these smoker chimneys. And that's going to be important for the deep sea stuff, right? That's going to probably end my phase 2 project. So it's going to be at the end, and it'll be a couple of videos. I suspect that ruins and wrecks are probably going to be the bulk of the series, okay? So we're still not ready for Deep Waters. What I'll do the next video is we're going to start setting up the table, a mock table, and we'll add the pieces of terrain little by little as we finish them so you guys can see the table grow, okay? So thank you guys. I'm sorry this video is so long, but that was a little bit on scatter terrain, and now I'm going to go finish, and then hopefully by the next video you'll see some finished product. All right, folks, thank you very much, and we'll talk very soon. And now I got to go shovel 2 feet of snow. Actually, we got more like 30 inches. Go figure. Goodbye, guys.